Hi, I'm Becky Cootes Kimberley. Tonight we're going to be talking about food sensitivities on the AO scan. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into what some of the things that are popping up on the scanner may actually mean. For those that don't know me, a little bit of background, I've been a traditional naturopathic doctor for about 2 years now, and I'm also a certified functional medicine practitioner, and I'm working with clients all over the world right now. And I've been using the AO scan device for a little bit over 2.5 years, and there's been a lot of different things that I've noticed, especially with the food sensitivity section, and that's what I want to go over tonight. All right, so I have a report pulled up right now on my phone. So I'm going to be glancing at that as I'm going through and kind of talking about some of the things that I commonly will see as I'm walking through someone's scans. Now, I like to look at the food sensitivities a couple different ways. So an example would be last night I went out to eat and had a little bit of sour cream, so I cheated a little bit. And today I actually had butter show up and casein as well as goat's milk. So normally those things don't show up for me, but because I had a little bit of that dairy last night, there is some residual sensitivity showing up today on my scans. Some other things you can kind of look at, especially with the dairy, is if someone's having a lot of histamine showing up. So as I get down a little bit lower in the scans, when we start talking about fruits and vegetables, I'll start to go through some of the common items that you will see that might have a lot of histamine foods in them. So that might alert you that the person that you're working with may need to have some histamine foods taken out. So the next category we have are the fruits. So not on my scan, but sometimes on other people's, I might see apricots, I might see avocados, bananas, a lot of the citrus fruits show up. Those are going to alert you that some of the histamine foods may need to come out. Now, something that I like to do is as I'm looking through some of these foods, I'm going to make little notes on my notebook paper for the client that I'm working with. And I might just jot down some of those foods that are coming up. That way, as I get down further in the vital scan, if I see histamine showing up, then I can refer back to those histamine foods that I was suspected that maybe that client needed to remove, and then we can remove them temporarily and just see if that improves. Some other foods that you might notice too, we all know what nightshades are. In the fruit and vegetable category, you'll see tomatoes show up. So now tomato is a nightshade. That is one of the nightshades. So if you see tomatoes, and then possibly down further when we get to the vegetables, maybe potatoes and eggplant showing up, that might alert you that that client that you're working with may need to have some of those nightshade foods removed. Grains, we get to the grain category. Now, personally, I don't eat gluten, but a lot of times when I look at my scans, sometimes gluten does show up. Today, obviously, it didn't. But you can see how millet showed up, corn showed up, and then brown rice. So sometimes you'll notice that maybe it's, say you go out to eat and you might order something gluten-free, but keep in mind a lot of times when they're cooking meals behind, there's going to be some cross-contamination. So you still may be picking up some gluten. The other thing you might notice too is there's a whole list of gluten-reactive foods. So rice is one of those foods. Corn is one of those foods. Quinoa, I don't think though quinoa shows up on our grains. That might be a good one to add. So if those are showing up, you might want to suspect that maybe that client needs to have all gluten taken out, including those gluten-reactive foods. When we get to legumes and nuts or beans and nuts, again, are two categories that I typically will look at. If someone has a lot of red showing up in those two categories, a lot of times that'll alert me that that person might have some gut issues, maybe leaky gut. Beans are really inflammatory as well as nuts for a lot of clients. So if you see a lot of categories showing up in that department, that might be what's going on. Now, a lot of times I get questions from people because they like to look at each individual category. I look at things globally. So let's go back to the grain category for me. There are lots of reds showing up in that grain category for me. So rather than focus on each individual one like barley, bran, brown rice, buckwheat, corn, millet, and spelt, in my mind, I'm going to say to myself, I need to make sure I have all grains taken out for the next few days and just monitor and see how I feel. I think sometimes people get so hyper-focused in trying to fix or eliminate one thing at a time instead of looking at the whole entire category. Now, meat is another interesting category. Sometimes I will notice beef showing up for some of my clients. So there's a couple different ways that you can look at this. Sometimes maybe you just had beef the day before and it's coming up. Sometimes I notice with beef, it may be because that person needs copper or maybe they need iron. So as I scroll down through the vital scan, when I start getting to those minerals, I can confirm if maybe someone does have low copper or low iron. And that in fact is why the beef is showing up in the meat category. Seafood category, again, you can kind of look at the types of fishes that are coming up. Maybe they're bottom feeders. Maybe they have a lot of antibiotics in them. Maybe someone actually needs omega-3s and that's why salmon's showing up. There's a lot of different ways that you can look at this. Sometimes with my clients, if I have a food that might be suspected as an irritant, I might have them eat just a little bit of that food, run a scan, and then see if that suspected food comes up. You can also do like what I did with the dairy, eat a little bit of sour cream or a little bit of the suspected food and then scan and see if that does come up. And then monitor your symptoms and notice if you have any maybe gas, bloating, diarrhea, any digestive issues. Maybe your hands and your fingers start to swell. Maybe you get a little extra mucus discharge. Maybe you break out in a skin rash. I know personally for me, I have not been able to put quinoa back in a couple years. The last time I had quinoa, I actually broke out in hives in 24 hours. So that was interesting. So even though quinoa is gluten-free, there are still gluten-reactive proteins in there that my body is still reacting to. So in the nuts section, again, I kind of talked about if there's a lot of nuts showing up in that section, you might want to suspect that that person has some gut issues, maybe digestive issues. Maybe they're starting to trend or lean towards leaky gut. And then maybe some of those foods just may need to be taken out for a certain amount of time. You can also explore and play around with some nut butters. What I've noticed is maybe someone doesn't tolerate the raw cashew or the raw almond, but they might be okay with a little bit of almond butter or a little bit of cashew butter. And again, if you're not sure, you could have your client eat a little bit of that and run a scan and then see if that's coming up for them. Seeds, they tend to be in the same boat as nuts. And again, if you can picture your gut being really inflamed, nuts and seeds can kind of create more inflammation in the gut. So when we're looking at doing some type of gut program or protocol, we want to try to pull out as much inflammation as we can. So oftentimes you'll see nuts and seeds having to have to be removed for a little bit. Now, the spices category can get really interesting. Sometimes what I notice with my clients is maybe when some of these particular foods are coming up, it might be reflecting elsewhere on the scan that they actually may need that. So what do I mean by that? If I scroll down to, let's go to cilantro. Cilantro is actually used as a heavy metal detox. So maybe your client consistently has cilantro showing up and they're not eating it. You could actually look further down in that vital scan and maybe look and see like what heavy metals are showing up in them. What is their liver doing? What are their detox pathways doing? That client could potentially need some cilantro to help start to detoxify their body. Clove is another one. Clove and I think oregano is in here down further. Those two are antiparasitics. So again, if maybe in the vitals section you scroll all the way down to the parasites, maybe that person has tons of parasites showing up, and then maybe cloves is showing up as well as oregano, you could potentially suspect that that client may need to take an anti-parasitical. Coffee is another category. A lot of times I'll see coffee coming up if I suspect someone maybe has mold, fungus, or candida. So if someone is continually coming up with coffee, you might want to look further into the vital scan and just see what's going on in the fungus category, the candida category, and the mold category. And maybe if you start to see a lot of markers in those categories, you might want to think about pulling coffee out temporarily. If we scroll down to, let's see, some other ones. So mint is another one. That's actually a gallbladder cleansing food. So now we can start looking at the liver and the gallbladder. Maybe your person needs some help with gallbladder cleansing. Some of the foods would be parsley. That's another herb that shows up. We have mint. Let's see if there's anything else. The rest are going to be in your vegetable category. So artichokes are going to be a gallbladder cleansing food. If we move down to beets, beets are actually going to be a gallbladder cleansing food too. So now you can start to see how if groupings of these foods are showing up, if you have a large group, maybe that person needs histamine foods removed. If you're seeing a lot of nightshades showing up, so some of the most common nightshades are going to be our tomatoes, potatoes, and eggplant. And if you see those showing up, you might want to suspect removing those foods temporarily. There are oxalates. Not a lot of people talk about oxalate foods, but some of the most common oxalate foods are going to be your sweet potatoes and your spinach. So again, if you recurrently see those showing up on the scanner, you might want to suspect oxalates. You could scroll down to the kidney function in your vital scan. And if you see a lot of kidney markers showing up, you might want to contemplate taking out oxalates for your clients. We already talked about beets. Bell peppers, again, that goes with the nightshades. Broccoli, I actually had broccoli show up the other day for myself because I haven't been eating a lot of broccoli. And broccoli is a food that has lots of sulfur in it, and we need sulfur. So I thought it was interesting because as I scrolled down further, I believe in the vital scan in the liver section where it gives you the methylation phases, the glutathione, the sulfation phase had actually come up double red for me that day. So I was taking that information that the sulfur phase was a little bogged down and I actually needed some broccoli that day to satisfy that need for sulfur. Some of the other foods, celery can go either way. Celery can be a high histamine food, so that potentially could be a food that needs to be eliminated if you suspect someone has a lot of histamine. But celery is also a really good food to cleanse the gallbladder. So looking at those foods in conjunction with then other parts of the vital scan, maybe looking at the liver, looking at the gallbladder, looking at the total bile acid, seeing if that stuff's coming up in correlation with the celery, that should help provide you some information as to whether or not you need to add those foods or eliminate those foods. Eggplant's another one. Again, we talked about how that's a nightshade. Kelp. Kelp has been an interesting one that I've noticed come up with a lot of my clients. Kelp is iodine. So sometimes I'll see kelp show up, and then when I scroll down into the vitamins and minerals section, I might see that there's a need for iodine. So really the body is trying to tell me, yes, you need kelp, but it could also be in the form of iodine. Mushrooms, a lot of times you'll see come up, again, they tend to be moldy foods. So mushrooms is a food that I will typically pull out if I know someone has a lot of yeast or fungus or mold in their system. So again, if you're seeing that showing up, you may want to think about pulling that food out. Onions is going to be a nightshade. Potatoes, we talked about those being a nightshade as well as a oxalate food. And then what are some common ones? Spinach. We talked about spinach and how that can be a high oxalate food. So again, if you're noticing maybe spinach coming up double red, and maybe you notice sweet potatoes, like actually today for me, sweet potatoes came up double red, and I haven't had sweet potatoes in a while. So, and ironically enough, since I've been traveling, I haven't been drinking as much water, so there was a lot of other kidney markers that were showing up today. So now I'm already starting to put 2 and 2 together about how sweet potatoes, oxalates, and kidneys are all related. And that's about all that I have for tips and tricks for the food sensitivity scans. So I just want you to just keep in mind that just because something's coming up doesn't always mean it necessarily needs to be removed. Again, you want to track your scans over periods of time, at least 3 to 5 scans, and notice what those trends and patterns are saying. It could be telling you that you need specific foods or specific nutrients, and that's why the brain is registering those. So thank you for allowing me to come on and just kind of go over some of the tips and tricks that I have with food sensitivities, and hopefully this will be able to help you begin to start to connect the dots on your scans.